Henry Kissinger said on this very program earlier this month, quote, "We may soon reach a point at which one has to come to two conclusions. One, that Iran is clearly going to go ahead to build a capacity that must lead to a nuclear capability, and secondly, that the present methods of restraining Iran are not succeeding. Does one then decide to go into a blockade of Iran or into real global sanctions or other steps? I prefer to leave that until we are closer to the moment. But we have to accept the fact that such a moment may be coming." Close quote. Has that moment already arrived?
It's coming, as Mr. Kissinger pointed out. I'm less cautious than he, and I would say that we need to make it very clear to the Iranians, very, very clear, that should they continue down the path they are following, they will pay heavily for it. And I would hope that all those parties, the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese in particular, who are loath to see an American attack on Iran, would jump on this bandwagon and make it clear to the Iranians that they will pay a heavy price. Thus,
Daniel, aren't you outlining a possibility that has already been precluded? We know the Russians aren't going to jump on the bandwagon.
well, but if we can...
We know the Europeans have no enthusiasm, don't we?
But what do they most dread? They most dread an American attack. I think it should be possible to say, look, if you don't want an American attack, then you have to join us in being very serious with the Iranians and making it clear to them that we will attack if they don't stop. In other words, the ideal resolution is for the Iranians themselves to close down this project, not for us to do it for them.
Right.
And I think the only realistic way of doing that is to have everyone convey the message to Tehran that, watch out, you're going to pay heavily in terms of security, in terms of your economy.
And you think that there's a realistic prospect that in the waning 8.5 months of the Bush administration...
I don't see it happening.
You don't?
No. I mean, that's what I'd like to see. What I suspect will be the case is that should the Democratic nominee win in November, President Bush will do something. And should it be Mr. McCain who wins, he'll punt and let McCain decide what to do.
Well, let me give you then the Krauthammer option. Charles Krauthammer, April 11th, 2008, in the Washington Post, he says, in effect, it's over. The Bush administration is not going to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear capability. So what it should do is issue the following statement. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear attack upon Israel by Iran or originating in Iran as an attack by Iran on the United States. In other words, offer the same nuclear guarantee to Israel that we offered to, it's still on the books, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the NATO alliance.
Right. I don't see any, I disagree.
You do?
On the one hand, I don't see any reason to decide in the spring that President Bush will not act in the next, 8 months, 7 months. I just don't see on what basis one draws that conclusion. And secondly, the Israelis are quite competent to take care of themselves. Studies show that were there to be a nuclear exchange, the number of Israelis killed, whilst a very large and serious number for Israel, would be paltry compared to the number of Iranians killed. The Israeli nuclear capability is substantial.
All right, let me ask you another question about the Israeli capability.
So in other words, in terms of deterrence, the Israelis...
They're already in good shape.
Yeah.
All right.
And they're making it clear. A minister in the government a few days ago made a statement to the Iranians, watch out, we'll wipe you out if you try to do anything towards us.
Does it make sense for Israel to be much more public about its nuclear capability during the Cold War, down to quite a low level of detail? Raw data about what we had was known publicly because we wanted it known publicly. So and so many MIRVs and such an arsenal. Should they do that?
The Israeli policy has been for 50 years now to be very secretive about their nuclear capabilities. I think that is an outdated policy.
You do?
It probably would make sense for them to boast about it a bit at this point.
July 7th, 1981, Israeli fighter jets take out the nuclear reactor at Osirak, 11 miles outside Baghdad. And we now know that in September of 2007, the Israelis destroy a nuclear reactor in Syria that the North Koreans were helping to build in Syria. Does Israel have the capacity to cripple, let's make this the weak formulation, to delay the Iranians in acquiring a nuclear capability?
It appears they do. There are 3 routes they could take. A northern route via the Turkish-Syrian border, a central route across Jordan and Iraq, and a southern route via the Jordanian.
You're talking about
border.
air routes?
Yeah.
Right, all right.
The middle one is actually most interesting because it would require getting permission from the United States. Who knows? It would probably take on the order of 25 F-15s and 25 F-16s. It would take the kind of...
Combined. You're talking total force of 50. 50.
It would take the kind of ordnance that we have been supplying to the Israelis. It would require a high degree of intelligence, which presumably they have, and probably would require striking 3 targets in Isfahan and Iraq and Natanz. And studies based on public information suggest that while this would not be a foregone conclusion, as it would be in the case of the United States,
right,
there's a pretty good chance that the Israelis could pull it off.
Let me ask you one final question about this, Iran and Israel and the United States. As between, I'm not even sure how to formulate this, so I'll ask you the question and you feel free to reformulate it if you'd like to, but what I'm getting at is, as between a greater American role in protecting Israel and a greater Israeli role in protecting Israel, that, or let's say you had a choice between President Bush taking out the nuclear capability in Iran and the Israelis doing so for themselves, which do you prefer? Which is better for the United States and which is better for Israel over the longer term?
I'd rather see the United States do it.
Why is that?
And that this is not a uniquely Israeli problem. This is a problem from many points of view. For example, it's a problem that if the Iranians do build and weaponize their nuclear weapons, they would then be breaking the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in a way that has not been done before, and would be a signal to others that you can do it freely as well. That's not an Israeli issue particularly.
Right.
I also think we have much greater capabilities. And I also think that the September Israeli raid on Syria presents a very interesting opportunity. What if we do something similar? Quietly go in, blow a few things up, don't declare anything to the outside world? Let the Iranians make the difficult choice. Do they acknowledge that they've had these facilities destroyed? Or do they go quiet, as the Syrians did?
This is the Vorthos Forum, and we approve this message.